Marcus Thompson sat in seat 14B, bouncing his 6-month-old daughter Emma gently on his lap as passengers filed onto the Boeing 737. The young father's hands trembled slightly as he checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. This cross-country flight from Seattle to Miami would be Emma's first time on an airplane, and his first time traveling alone with her since his wife Sarah had passed away 4 months ago. The other passengers barely glanced their way as they settled in for the 5-hour journey. Marcus had chosen an aisle seat, hoping it would give him easier access to walk Emma around if she became fussy. He'd packed everything he could think of: bottles, diapers, pacifiers, her favorite stuffed elephant, and even some of those little bags of snacks the parenting blogs recommended for emergencies. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Emma started to whimper. Marcus quickly offered her a bottle, but she pushed it away with her tiny hands. He tried the pacifier next, then the stuffed elephant, but nothing seemed to work. The whimpering turned into full crying as the engines roared to life. "It's okay, sweetheart," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "Daddy's here. We're going to see Grandma and Grandpa, remember? They can't wait to meet you properly." The businessman in 14A shot Marcus an annoyed look as Emma's crying grew louder. Across the aisle, a woman in an expensive suit rolled her eyes and put on noise-canceling headphones. Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment as more passengers began to turn around, their expressions ranging from irritated to downright hostile. Emma's cries intensified as the plane lifted off. The change in air pressure seemed to make everything worse. Marcus tried everything he could think of, walking her up and down the narrow aisle, singing softly, making funny faces, even attempting to show her the view from the tiny window. Nothing worked. If anything, she seemed to cry harder with each passing minute. "Sir, you need to return to your seat," the flight attendant said firmly as Marcus paced near the emergency exit with Emma. Her name tag read Jennifer, and her smile looked forced. "We're still climbing." "I'm sorry, I'm just trying to calm her down," Marcus said, his voice barely audible over Emma's wails. "She's never flown before, and I think the pressure is bothering her ears." Jennifer nodded curtly. "I understand, but safety regulations require all passengers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened until we reach cruising altitude." Marcus returned to his seat, feeling the weight of dozens of annoyed stares. Emma's crying had reached a pitch that seemed to cut through every other sound on the plane. The baby's face was red and streaked with tears, and Marcus felt completely helpless. This wasn't how he'd imagined their trip would start. "Can't you do something about that?" The businessman in 14A muttered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "Some of us are trying to work. I'm doing everything I can," Marcus replied, his voice tight with stress and grief. "She's just a baby." "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before bringing her on a plane," the man shot back, not bothering to lower his voice. Marcus felt tears prick his own eyes. He'd been dreading this moment. The judgment, the criticism, the feeling that he was failing as a parent in front of strangers. Sarah would have known what to do. Sarah always knew how to calm Emma down. But Sarah wasn't here anymore, and Marcus was learning every day just how much he still didn't know about taking care of his daughter alone. The woman across the aisle removed one earbud and leaned over. "Excuse me, but some of us paid good money for this flight. Can't you give her something to make her sleep?" Marcus shook his head, bouncing Emma more frantically. The pediatrician said not to give her any medication for flying. "She's too young." "Then maybe you should have waited until she was older to travel," another passenger called out from a few rows back. The comments kept coming, each one making Marcus feel smaller and more isolated. He understood their frustration, he really did. Emma's crying was loud and constant, and it had been going on for nearly 30 minutes now. But these people didn't understand that he didn't have a choice. Sarah's parents lived in Miami, and they were the only family Emma had left besides him. They needed to meet their granddaughter, and Marcus needed their help more than he'd ever needed anything in his life. A flight attendant approached, a different one this time, older with kind eyes and graying hair. Her name tag read Patricia. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly, having to lean close to be heard over Emma's cries. "I don't know what to do," Marcus admitted, his voice cracking. "Nothing's working. I've tried everything I can think of." Patricia studied Emma for a moment, then looked back at Marcus with compassion. "Is this your first time flying with a baby?" Marcus nodded. "Her mother, My wife. She passed away a few months ago. I'm still figuring out how to do this alone. Something shifted in Patricia's expression. She glanced around the cabin at the increasingly agitated passengers, then back at Marcus and Emma. Let me see what I can do, she said softly. As Patricia walked toward the front of the plane, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement in first class. Through the gap in the curtain, he saw a man in an expensive suit watching the situation unfold. The man looked to be in his 50s with silver hair and an air of authority about him. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus expected to see the same annoyance he'd been getting from everyone else. Instead, the man's expression was thoughtful, almost sympathetic. He said something to the flight attendant standing nearby, then stood up and began walking toward the back of the plane. Emma continued to cry, her small body shaking with the force of her wails. Marcus felt completely defeated. He'd thought the hardest part of this trip would be saying goodbye to the house where he and Sarah had planned to raise their daughter. He hadn't expected to feel like such a failure before they'd even reached cruising altitude. The silver-haired man from first class was getting closer, moving purposefully down the aisle despite the turbulence of other passengers' complaints filling the air around them. The silver-haired man stopped beside Marcus's seat and knelt down in the aisle, bringing himself to eye level with the distressed father and crying baby. Up close, Marcus could see the man's expensive suit was perfectly tailored, and his watch probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. But there was something warm in his eyes that surprised Marcus. "Mind if I try something?" the man asked quietly, having to speak loudly enough to be heard over Emma's cries. Marcus looked at him skeptically. "Are you going to tell me I shouldn't have brought her on the plane too?" The man smiled sadly. "Actually, I was going to tell you that I remember being exactly where you are right now. My name is David Chen, and I have 3 children of my own. Well, they're all grown now, but I remember those early days." Despite his exhaustion and stress, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "Marcus Thompson," he replied. "And this is Emma." David stood up and looked around the cabin at the sea of annoyed faces. The complaints were getting louder, and Marcus could hear passengers starting to demand that the flight attendants do something about the situation. Some were even calling for the pilot to make an emergency landing. "Emma," David said softly, leaning down again. "That's a beautiful name. You know, Emma, your daddy is working very hard to take care of you. Sometimes when we're scared or uncomfortable, crying is the only way we know how to tell people what we need." To Marcus's amazement, Emma's cries seemed to quiet slightly, as if she was listening to this new voice. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "Do you mind if I try something that used to work with my youngest?" David asked Marcus. Marcus nodded desperately. At this point, he was willing to try anything. David opened an app on his phone, and suddenly, the soft sounds of ocean waves began playing from the speaker. He held the phone near Emma's ear, and incredibly, her crying began to subside to hiccups and sniffles. "White noise," David explained quietly. "My daughter Jessica used to cry on every flight until we discovered this. The engine noise sometimes helps, but ocean sounds worked better for her." Marcus stared in disbelief as Emma's breathing began to calm. She was still fussy, but the ear-piercing wails had stopped. "How did you know to do that?" "Experience," David said with a gentle laugh, "and a lot of trial and error. Jessica is 25 now, but I still remember that first flight when she was about Emma's age. I thought the other passengers were going to throw us off the plane at 30,000 feet. The businessman in 14A, who had been complaining the loudest, turned around to see what was happening. His expression changed from irritation to curiosity as he watched Emma gradually settle down. "Is that actually working?" he asked, his tone considerably softer than before. David nodded. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. Babies cry because they're trying to communicate something. Hunger, discomfort, fear. Emma here is probably scared by all the new sounds and sensations." Patricia, the kind flight attendant, appeared beside them with a warm smile. "I see you found some help," she said to Marcus. "Mr. Chen here seems to have the magic touch," Marcus replied, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to ease for the first time since boarding. David adjusted his position so he was sitting on the armrest of the empty seat across the aisle. "The truth is, there's no magic involved, just patience and understanding. Every parent has been where you are, Marcus. The difference is that most of us had partners to help share the load." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. It was the first time since Sarah's death that anyone had acknowledged how hard it was to do everything alone. Her mother died in a car accident 4 months ago, he said quietly. I'm still learning how to be both parents to her. The cabin had grown noticeably quieter. Other passengers were beginning to listen to the conversation, and the hostile atmosphere was slowly shifting to something more sympathetic. David's expression grew serious. I'm so sorry for your loss. Losing a partner when you have a young child. I can't imagine how difficult that must be. A woman from a few rows back stood up and walked over to them. Marcus recognized her as one of the passengers who had been complaining earlier. She was holding a small stuffed bear. Excuse me, she said hesitantly. I wanted to apologize for what I said earlier. I have grandchildren and I should have been more understanding. She held out the bear. This was going to be a gift for my granddaughter, but maybe Emma would like it. Marcus looked up at her in surprise. That's very kind of you, but you don't have to. I want to, she insisted. My husband and I raised 4 children, and I remember how overwhelming it could be even with 2 of us. I can't imagine doing it alone. Emma had stopped crying completely now, her attention caught by the ocean sounds still playing from David's phone. She reached out with one tiny hand toward the stuffed bear, and the woman's face lit up. She likes it, the woman said softly. What's her name? Emma, Marcus replied, accepting the bear gratefully. And thank you. This is really kind. The businessman in 14A cleared his throat. Look, I owe you an apology too. I was being a jerk earlier. I don't have kids myself, but that's no excuse for being unsympathetic. More passengers began to approach, offering everything from snacks to advice to simple words of encouragement. The entire atmosphere of the cabin had transformed from hostility to compassion in the span of just a few minutes. David watched this transformation with satisfaction. You know what I've learned in my years of business and parenting? He said to Marcus. People generally want to help. Sometimes they just need someone to show them how. Patricia returned with a small basket filled with items from the galley. Crackers, juice boxes, and even a few extra pillows. The crew wanted to contribute too, she explained. We've all seen traveling parents struggle, and we want to help make the rest of your flight more comfortable. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of kindness. I don't know what to say. Thank you all so much. Emma gurgled happily, clutching her new stuffed bear and listening to the ocean sounds. The transformation was remarkable, from a screaming, inconsolable baby to a content, curious infant in less than 20 minutes. David glanced at his expensive watch and then at the flight attendant. Patricia, would it be possible to move Marcus and Emma to first class? I have an empty seat next to mine and it might be more comfortable for them. Marcus's eyes widened. Oh no, I couldn't possibly accept that. You've already done so much. David waved off Marcus's protests with a gentle but firm gesture. Nonsense. First class has more space and Emma will be more comfortable. Plus, I'd enjoy the company. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. I think that's a wonderful idea. Let me check with the captain, but I'm sure it won't be a problem. As Patricia headed toward the cockpit, David helped Marcus gather his belongings. The diaper bag, bottles, and now the growing collection of gifts from other passengers. Emma continued to gurgle contentedly, fascinated by the ocean sounds still playing from David's phone. I have to ask, Marcus said as they prepared to move. What do you do for work? You seem to have a lot of influence around here. David smiled mysteriously. Let's just say I'm in the transportation business. I'll tell you more once we get settled. The move to first class created a small parade down the aisle, with several passengers helping to carry Marcus's things and offering final words of encouragement. The businessman from 14A handed Marcus a business card. If you're ever looking for work in the tech industry, give me a call, he said. Any father who can handle what you're going through with such grace would be an asset to any team. The woman who had given Emma the stuffed bear patted Marcus on the shoulder. You're doing a wonderful job, dear. Your wife would be very proud. Once they were seated in the spacious first-class cabin, Marcus felt like he could breathe properly for the first time since boarding. Emma was fascinated by the extra space and the large window beside their seat. She babbled happily, pointing at the clouds outside with her tiny finger. This is incredible, Marcus said, settling into the leather seat. I've never flown first class before. David adjusted his seatbelt and smiled. Well, then this is a day of firsts for both you and Emma. Speaking of which, I should probably properly introduce myself. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. David Chen, Chief Executive Officer of Pacific Airways. Marcus stared at the card in shock. You're the CEO of the airline? Guilty as charged, David said with a chuckle. I try to fly on our planes regularly, both to keep an eye on operations and to stay connected with our customers' experiences. Oh my God, Marcus said, his face turning red. I'm so embarrassed. Your customers were complaining about my daughter, and you had to deal with it personally. I should have. Stop right there, David interrupted gently. You have absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. Emma is a baby doing what babies do. And what I witnessed back there wasn't a problem that needed solving. It was a community coming together to help someone in need. Emma reached out toward David's business card, and he handed it to her with a laugh. Though I should probably get that back before she eats it. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. We've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, and you're now free to move about the cabin. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge something special that happened in our cabin today. Marcus looked at David in confusion, but the CEO just smiled and held up a finger to indicate they should listen. We had a situation earlier where a young father was traveling alone with his infant daughter. The captain continued. What started as a challenging moment became an incredible display of human kindness and community. I want to thank Mr. David Chen, our CEO, who was traveling with us today and helped turn a difficult situation into something beautiful. The entire cabin erupted in applause, and Marcus felt his eyes fill with tears again. Several flight attendants gathered around their seats, smiling and clapping. This is why I love this job, Patricia said, wiping tears from her own eyes. Moments like these remind you why the airline business is really about bringing people together. David stood up and addressed the first-class cabin. Thank you, Captain Rodriguez. But the real hero today is Marcus Thompson, who is raising his daughter Emma alone after losing his wife. His courage and grace under pressure inspired all of us to be better people. More applause filled the cabin, and Marcus felt overwhelmed by the attention. Emma clapped her tiny hands too, not understanding what was happening but enjoying the excitement. I don't deserve all this attention, Marcus said quietly to David as they sat back down. I was just trying to calm down my crying baby. That's exactly why you deserve it, David replied. You were doing your best in an impossible situation and you never gave up. That takes real strength. A flight attendant approached with a tray of food from the first-class menu. Compliments of the crew, she said with a warm smile. We thought you might be hungry. As Marcus ate his first decent meal in days, he found himself opening up to David about his life. He talked about Sarah, about how they had met in college and dreamed of traveling the world together. He spoke about the accident, about the overwhelming grief and fear that came with suddenly being a single parent. The hardest part, Marcus admitted, is feeling like I'm failing her every day. Sarah would have known exactly what to do when Emma started crying. She would have had some trick or technique that I've never thought of. David listened intently, occasionally bouncing Emma on his knee when she got restless. Can I share something with you? When my wife died, my oldest son was 15 and my twins were 12. I thought I knew everything about parenting because I'd been there for their whole lives. But suddenly, being the only parent, that's a completely different challenge. Marcus looked up in surprise. Your wife died too? Cancer 8 years ago. And I can tell you that for the first 2 years I felt like I was failing them every single day. I was a successful businessman who could run a multi-billion-dollar company. But I couldn't figure out how to braid my daughter's hair, or remember which twin had which allergies. Emma had fallen asleep in David's arms, and he carefully adjusted his position to keep her comfortable. What I learned is that there's no such thing as perfect parenting. Sarah might have known different techniques than you do, but that doesn't mean your techniques are wrong. Emma doesn't need you to be Sarah. She needs you to be the best version of Marcus you can be. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence, and Marcus instinctively reached for Emma, but she remained peacefully asleep. How do you do it? How do you stop feeling like you're not enough? Honestly, you don't, David said with a sad smile. But you learn to trust that love is enough even when you don't have all the answers. And you accept help when it's offered, which you did beautifully today. Patricia appeared beside them again, this time carrying a tablet. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Chen, we're getting some wonderful feedback from passengers about what happened today. Several people have submitted comments praising both the crew's response and your leadership. David glanced at the tablet, then looked back at Marcus. You know what? I think this story needs to be shared. Would you be comfortable if Pacific Airways wrote about this experience? Obviously, we'd respect your privacy, but I think people need to hear about what happened here today. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, still processing David's suggestion. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of attention. This was just a really hard day that turned out better than expected. David nodded understandingly. I completely respect that. But think about it. There are thousands of single parents out there who feel exactly like you did this morning. Scared, alone, convinced they're failing their children. Your story could help them realize they're not alone. Emma stirred slightly in David's arms, making soft baby sounds before settling back into sleep. Marcus marveled at how comfortable she seemed with this stranger, who had become their guardian angel at 30,000 feet. Tell me more about your children, Marcus said, wanting to change the subject. How did you manage after your wife passed? David's expression grew thoughtful. The first year was chaos. I hired nannies, but none of them lasted more than a few months. The kids were grieving, acting out, and I was working 18-hour days trying to escape my own grief. I nearly lost everything that mattered. What changed? My daughter Jessica got arrested for shoplifting when she was 14. When I got the call from the police station, I realized I had no idea what was happening in her life. I'd been so focused on providing for them financially that I'd forgotten they needed me to actually be present. Marcus leaned forward, captivated by the story. What did you do? I stepped back from the company. Promoted my COO to handle day-to-day operations while I figured out how to be a real father. It was the hardest and best decision I ever made. David smiled down at Emma. Jessica is a lawyer now, working for a nonprofit that helps single mothers. The twins both graduated from college last year. One's a teacher, the other's starting medical school. They sound amazing. They are. And they taught me that kids don't need perfect parents. They need present parents. Parents who show up, who admit their mistakes, and who love them even when everything falls apart. The flight attendant approached with a bottle warmed to the perfect temperature. I thought Emma might be getting hungry, she said softly. Marcus took the bottle gratefully, and Emma woke up just as he was preparing to feed her. She accepted the bottle immediately, her big eyes looking up at him with complete trust. You see that? David pointed to Emma's expression. That's not the look of a baby who thinks her father is failing. That's pure love and trust. As Emma drank her bottle, other passengers began stopping by their seats. The woman who had given Emma the stuffed bear introduced herself as Margaret, a grandmother from Phoenix visiting her daughter's family in Miami. I wanted to apologize again for my behavior earlier, she said. My daughter reminded me via text message that I used to be that overwhelmed mother on airplanes, and people were usually much less kind to me than they were to you today. The businessman from economy class also stopped by during a trip to the restroom. I've been thinking about what happened earlier, he said. I don't have children, but I have a nephew who's about Emma's age. After watching you today, I have a lot more respect for what parents go through. I'm sorry I was such a jerk. Marcus shook hands with both of them, feeling overwhelmed by the continued kindness. Thank you both. This day has been unexpected in the best possible way. As the afternoon wore on, David shared more stories about his business experiences and his children. He talked about building Pacific Airways from a small regional carrier into one of the country's major airlines. But he spent more time talking about school plays, soccer games, and family vacations. The business stuff feels important when you're in the middle of it, David reflected. But at the end of the day, the moments that matter are the small ones. Teaching Jessica how to drive, helping the twins with their science projects, being there when they needed me. Emma finished her bottle and began to fuss again, but this time Marcus felt more confident. He stood up and walked her around the first-class cabin, and several passengers smiled and waved at her. She giggled and reached out toward the flight attendants, who were clearly enchanted with her. She's going to be a natural traveler, Patricia observed. Look how curious she is about everything. David joined them in the aisle. Marcus, I want to make you an offer, and I hope you'll consider it seriously. Marcus looked at him curiously. Okay. Pacific Airways is always looking for good people in our customer service department. We have offices in Miami, and we offer excellent benefits including health insurance, childcare support, and travel benefits for employees and their families. David pulled out another business card and wrote something on the back. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you an opportunity. You handled today's situation with more grace and professionalism than many of our trained staff members. Marcus stared at the business card, reading David's personal phone number written on the back. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything right now. Think about it. Talk to your in-laws when you get to Miami. But know that the offer is genuine and it comes with my personal recommendation. Emma had grown sleepy again, lulled by the gentle motion of walking around the cabin. Marcus returned to his seat and settled her against his chest where she dozed peacefully. Why are you doing all this? Marcus asked quietly. I mean, I'm grateful beyond words, but this is so much more than just helping calm down a crying baby. David was quiet for a long moment. When my wife died, I felt completely alone. I had employees and business associates, but very few real friends. No one who understood what it was like to suddenly be responsible for everything. If someone had shown me the kindness that we've shown you today, it might have changed everything. But you turned out okay. Your kids are successful, your business is thriving. We survived, David corrected gently, but we could have thrived. I could have been a better father if I'd had more support, more community. What happened on this plane today? People coming together to help someone in need. That's how communities should work. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Miami International Airport. The weather is beautiful, with sunny skies and a temperature of 78 degrees. Marcus felt a mix of sadness and anxiety as he realized their journey together was coming to an end. David, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done today. The thanks go both ways, David replied. You reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. It's not about moving people from point A to point B. It's about connecting human beings and making their journeys better. Emma woke up as the plane began its descent, and her ears popped from the pressure change. But instead of crying, she looked around with interest, as if she was excited to see what would happen next. As the plane touched down in Miami, Marcus felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The flight that had started as his worst nightmare had turned into something almost magical. Emma was alert and happy, looking out the window at the palm trees and bright sunshine of her new temporary home. Welcome to Miami, Emma, Marcus whispered to his daughter. Your grandparents are going to fall in love with you the moment they see you. David helped Marcus gather their belongings as the plane taxied to the gate. The crew had given Emma several small gifts, a pair of plastic pilot wings, a stuffed airplane, and a certificate declaring her an honorary first-time flyer. I have a confession, David said as they waited for the seatbelt sign to turn off. I called ahead and arranged for someone to help you through the airport. Miami International can be overwhelming, especially when you're traveling with a baby and lots of luggage. Marcus shook his head in amazement. You didn't need to do that. I wanted to. Besides, it's the least I can do after Emma provided me with the best entertainment I've had on a flight in years. David tickled Emma's chin, making her giggle. When the plane door opened, Marcus was surprised to see two airport employees waiting with a wheelchair transport service and a luggage cart. Behind them stood an older couple that he recognized immediately from photos. Sarah's parents, Robert and Linda Martinez. Oh my goodness, Linda gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she saw Emma for the first time in person. She's beautiful, Marcus. She looks just like Sarah did at that age. Robert stepped forward and embraced Marcus carefully, mindful of the baby in his arms. We've been so worried about this trip. How did everything go? Marcus looked back at David, who was gathering his own belongings. It was incredible. Let me introduce you to someone very special. David approached the group with a warm smile. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, I presume. I'm David Chen. Your son-in-law and granddaughter made quite an impression on all of us today. Linda looked confused. I'm sorry, are you a friend of Marcus's? Not exactly, Marcus said with a laugh. This is David Chen. He's the CEO of Pacific Airways, and he basically saved our entire flight. Robert's eyes widened. The CEO? What were you doing in coach? Actually, he wasn't, Marcus explained. He was in first class, but when Emma had a meltdown, he came back to help us. Then he moved us to first class and spent the entire flight taking care of both of us. Linda looked at David with tears in her eyes. Thank you so much. We've been so worried about Marcus traveling alone with Emma. He's been trying to do everything by himself since... She couldn't finish the sentence. Since Sarah died, David said gently. He told me about your daughter. I'm so sorry for your loss. The airport employees helped transfer Marcus's luggage to their cart, and the group began walking toward the exit. Emma was fascinated by all the activity and noise of the busy airport, pointing at everything and babbling excitedly. She seems to love traveling, Linda observed. Look how alert and happy she is. She wasn't always happy today, Marcus admitted. She cried for about 30 minutes straight at the beginning of the flight. I thought the other passengers were going to revolt. David laughed. They nearly did. But then something beautiful happened. Instead of staying angry, people started helping. By the end of the flight, Emma had about 20 new aunts and uncles. As they walked through the terminal, David's phone rang constantly. Marcus could hear fragments of business conversations, but David kept them short and focused on the group. Don't you need to get back to work? Marcus asked. I feel terrible taking up so much of your time. This is the most important work I've done all week, David replied firmly. Besides, my driver won't be here for another hour anyway. When they reached the baggage claim area, David surprised Marcus by helping to identify and collect all of their luggage. He seemed genuinely invested in making sure everything went smoothly. I have something for Emma, Linda said, pulling a wrapped package from her purse. I made this myself. Inside was a beautiful hand-knitted blanket in soft pink and yellow. Emma immediately grabbed for it and Linda wrapped it around her tiny shoulders. It's perfect, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah would have loved it. I started making it the day she was born, Linda admitted. I've been working on it every day since the accident, thinking about finally getting to meet her. Robert cleared his throat. We have a confession too, Marcus. We've been talking, and we want you to consider moving down here permanently. I know it's a big decision, but Emma should grow up knowing her grandparents, and you shouldn't have to raise her alone in Seattle with all those memories. Marcus looked down at Emma, who was contentedly chewing on the corner of her new blanket. The idea had occurred to him, but he'd been afraid to bring it up. I've actually been thinking about that, he admitted, but I'd need to find work and childcare and... Actually, David interrupted, about that job offer I mentioned. I'm completely serious. We have a position in our customer relations department that would be perfect for you. The salary is good, the benefits are excellent, and we have on-site childcare for employees. Linda and Robert exchanged excited glances. You offered Marcus a job? Linda asked. I offered him an opportunity, David corrected. After watching how he handled today's situation, I know he'd be an asset to our team. He stayed calm under pressure, treated everyone with respect even when they weren't showing him the same courtesy, and never gave up on finding a solution. Robert put his arm around Marcus's shoulder. Son, this sounds like an answer to prayer. I don't want to make any quick decisions, Marcus said carefully. This has all happened so fast. Of course, David agreed. Take your time. The offer will stand whenever you're ready. He handed Marcus another business card. This one has my personal assistant's information. When you're ready to talk, just call her and she'll set everything up. Emma had fallen asleep again, exhausted by the day's adventures. She looked peaceful and content in Marcus's arms, still clutching her new blanket. Look at her, Linda whispered. She feels safe. That's all that matters. As they walked toward the exit, David's driver appeared, a professional-looking man in a dark suit who quickly took charge of David's luggage. This is where I have to leave you, David said. But Marcus, I want you to promise me something. What's that? Promise me you'll consider that job offer seriously. Not because I'm trying to help you out of pity, but because I genuinely believe you'd be good at it, and more importantly, because Emma deserves to grow up in a place where she has family support. Marcus shifted Emma to his other arm and extended his hand to shake David's. I promise I'll think about it. And David, I can never thank you enough for what you did today. You changed everything. David smiled and shook Marcus's hand firmly. You did that yourself. All I did was help other people see what I saw. A good father doing his best in a difficult situation. Linda stepped forward and hugged David warmly. Thank you for taking care of our family today. You're welcome in our home anytime. I may take you up on that, David said with a grin. I have a feeling Emma and I are going to be friends for a long time." As David's car pulled away from the curb, Marcus watched through the window until it disappeared into Miami traffic. 3 hours ago, David Chen had been a complete stranger. Now he felt like family. "What an extraordinary man," Robert said, voicing what they were all thinking. "He told me he lost his wife too," Marcus shared as they walked toward Robert's car. "He said he wished someone had shown him the kindness that everyone showed me today." Linda adjusted Emma's blanket as Marcus buckled her into the car seat they had brought. "Maybe that's why it happened this way. Maybe Sarah somehow arranged for you to meet exactly the person you needed to meet." Marcus had never been particularly religious, but as they drove through Miami toward the Martinez family home, he found himself wondering if Linda might be right. The chances of Emma having a meltdown on the exact flight where the CEO of the airline was traveling seemed astronomical. The chances of that CEO being a widowed father who understood exactly what Marcus was going through seemed impossible. But it had happened. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson sat in his new office at Pacific Airways headquarters in Miami, looking out at the runway where planes took off and landed throughout the day. Emma was in the company childcare center just 2 floors below, probably taking her afternoon nap or playing with the other children. The transition to Miami had been easier than he'd ever imagined possible. True to his word, David had offered Marcus a position in customer relations, and the work had proven to be both challenging and rewarding. Marcus found that his experience as a struggling single parent made him uniquely qualified to help other travelers facing difficulties. His desk was covered with thank you letters from passengers whose problems he'd helped solve, missed connections that led to family reunions, lost luggage that contained irreplaceable mementos, and yes, several notes from parents grateful for his patience and understanding when their children had meltdowns during flights. A gentle knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. David Chen entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a broad smile. Despite being the CEO of a major corporation, David had made it a point to check in with Marcus regularly, both as an employer and as a friend. "How's our newest customer relations specialist doing?" David asked, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "Better than I could have hoped," Marcus replied honestly. "I helped a family yesterday whose flight was canceled due to weather. Their daughter was supposed to be the flower girl in a wedding, and she was heartbroken. We managed to get them on a different flight and even arranged ground transportation so they'd make it to the ceremony on time." David nodded approvingly. "Those are the moments that make this job worthwhile. How's Emma adjusting to the childcare center?" "She loves it. The caregivers say she's one of the most social babies they've ever seen. I think all that attention she got on the airplane made her comfortable with strangers." Marcus laughed. "Sometimes I think she's more popular at work than I am. Speaking of popularity, I have something to show you." David pulled out his tablet and opened up the Pacific Airways website. "Remember when I asked if we could share your story?" Marcus nodded. He had eventually agreed, after David assured him they would focus on the positive community response rather than his personal tragedy. "The article went live this morning," David said, turning the tablet toward Marcus. "The response has been incredible." Marcus read the headline. "When a baby's tears brought a plane together, a story of community, compassion, and second chances." The article featured a photo of Emma playing in the company childcare center, along with testimonials from several passengers who had been on that original flight. "Listen to this," David said, scrolling to the comments section. "This is from Margaret, the woman who gave Emma the stuffed bear. She wrote, 'This story reminded me that we all have the power to make someone's day better or worse. I choose better now.'" Marcus felt tears in his eyes as he continued reading. There were dozens of comments from other passengers, from Pacific Airways employees, and from complete strangers who had been moved by the story. "The best part," David continued, "is that it's inspired our employees across the system. We've had reports of flight attendants going above and beyond to help traveling families, gate agents finding creative solutions to problems, and passengers helping other passengers. Your story has made everyone remember why we're really in this business." A soft chime from Marcus's computer indicated an incoming video call. The screen showed it was from Patricia, the kind flight attendant who had been working their original flight. "Mind if I take this?" Marcus asked. Of course not. In fact, I'd love to say hello. Marcus accepted the call, and Patricia's smiling face filled the screen. She was in what looked like a hotel room, probably during a layover somewhere. Marcus, I just read the article about you and Emma. How are you both doing? We're doing wonderfully, Patricia. Emma's thriving here in Miami, and I love my job. This is David, by the way. Patricia's eyes widened as David moved into view of the camera. Mr. Chen, I didn't know you were there. I wanted to thank you again for what you did that day. It was one of the most beautiful things I've witnessed in my 20 years of flying. The beauty came from everyone working together, David replied. You and your crew set the tone for everything that followed. I have some news to share, Patricia said excitedly. That flight changed something in me. I've been accepted into the company's management training program. I want to help train new flight attendants to handle difficult situations with the same compassion we showed that day. Marcus felt a surge of pride and happiness. Patricia, that's amazing. He'll be incredible at it. After they ended the call, David leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. You know what I love about this story? It keeps growing. Every person who was touched by what happened that day has gone on to touch other people's lives. I got a letter last week from the businessman who was sitting in 14A, Marcus shared. He said watching us that day made him realize he wanted to be a father. He and his wife are adopting a baby girl next month. David chuckled. I'm not surprised. Sometimes it takes witnessing, real love and dedication to help people understand what they want in their own lives. Emma's voice could be heard over the office intercom system. The child care center called parents when the children woke up from naps. Her happy babbling made both men smile. She's awake, Marcus said, standing up. Want to come say hello? She always lights up when she sees you. They walked down to the child care center together, where Emma was indeed awake and playing with a colorful set of blocks. The moment she saw Marcus and David, she clapped her hands and reached toward them. There's my favorite co-worker, David said, picking her up and spinning her around gently. Emma giggled with delight. She's grown so much since that first flight, Marcus observed. Sometimes I look at her and can hardly believe how far we've both come. What would Sarah think of all this? David asked quietly. Marcus considered the question seriously. I think she'd be amazed. She always believed that good things happen to good people. But even she might have trouble believing this story. A chance meeting on an airplane leading to a new career, a new home, and a whole new family of friends. Emma reached out for Marcus, and he took her from David's arms. She immediately started babbling, as if she was trying to tell them about her day at childcare. I think she's going to be a natural communicator, David observed. Maybe she'll follow in your footsteps in customer service. Or maybe she'll run an airline, Marcus replied with a grin. As they stood there in the bright, cheerful childcare center, surrounded by the sounds of happy children and caring adults, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude. The worst day of his traveling life had led to the best chapter of his entire life. David, he said quietly, I need you to know something. That day on the airplane, you didn't just help me calm down a crying baby. You saved us. You gave us a future we never would have had otherwise. David smiled, but his eyes were serious. You gave me something too, Marcus. You reminded me why I fell in love with this industry in the first place. It's not about the planes or the profits, it's about bringing people together and helping them get to where they need to be. Emma gurgled and pointed toward the window, where a Pacific Airways jet was taking off into the Miami sunset. Both men followed her gaze, watching as the plane climbed higher and higher, carrying its own cargo of hopes, dreams, and human stories. Look at that, Emma, Marcus whispered to his daughter. That's how we got here. And who knows, maybe someday you'll help other people find their way home too. As if she understood, Emma clapped her hands and laughed, her joy echoing through the child care center, and somehow capturing everything beautiful about second chances, unexpected kindness, and the amazing things that can happen when strangers decide to take care of each other.